Hey everybody, Pete A. Turner, executive producer and host of your Break It Down show. Today's episode is pretty cool. We've got the Libertarian Party's candidate for the President of the United States. Her name is Jo Jorgensen. Her VP, his last name is Cohen. So between Jorgensen and Cohen, they provide the presidential ticket that is a viable, we always ask for this, a viable third-party option. So you don't have to vote for Joe Biden. You don't have to vote for Donald Trump. You actually have someone who's going to be on the ballot in every state, who is a sane person, who has fantastic credentials in terms of education and experience. And so we thought, hey, let's have Jo on and talk about her platform and what it takes to do what she wants to do with the government. You may not be a libertarian, but a lot of us, I think, want something different than what we're being offered. And so I think it's an interesting conversation to have. John joins me on this episode, and he and I both at the end are like, hey, you know what? If nothing else, this is better than the other two options, and we remain convinced Jo is the way to go. So the other thing I want to say is we're recording this episode. I should say I'm recording this intro from the side of the road in Atlanta, waiting to hook up with Scott Husing as he races towards me from South Carolina as we begin the return trip for the Ride for the Brave. You can follow our adventures on savethebrave.org or on the Facebook page or on Instagram. Obviously, our own personal accounts, you can find it. So you can follow Echo and Ramadi or me at P.A. Turner. You're going to find most of the information on the Save the Brave Facebook page. That's where most of it will kind of shoot out from. But for sure, pictures, videos, updates in general from our trip. Everything has been fantastic thus far. We've had a great time. Met some wonderful people. If you're in the Atlanta area and want a B&B to go to, I have to recommend the Hacienda. I just left there a few minutes ago, and it is marvelous. You will really love it. Great people. Also, the Cochrane Mill Brewery out there in Fairburn, Georgia. If you can get over to those places, I know you'll have a good time. So if you're in Atlanta, the southwestern part, sort of near the airport, about 10 minutes away. Those are great locations. They've been fantastic people and supported us tremendously. Ed and Tara, thank you so much. All right, one more thing I have to say real quick is Save the Brave, savethebrave.org. That's where you can donate if you want to go there. All right, last thing I'm going to say is here comes Jo Jorgensen.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This
East.
is Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
I'm Jo Jorgensen, and this is the Break It Live show. Thanks so much.
And now, the Break It Down show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
It's the Break It Down show, and we will break it live.
Break It Down show. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, this campaign, it's kind of like if it's Tuesday, it must be Belgium.
Right?
Yeah. That's great. We want to capture that for sure.
Yeah.
We're excited to have Jo Jorgensen. I'm just going to introduce you, Jo, to our audience. Jo Jorgensen is the Libertarian nominee for the this presidential election. So we're really excited. I was just telling Pete that neither one of us is registered as a libertarian, but what we're excited about is hearing about the libertarian platform because Pete and I both, to varying degrees, believe in liberty. Mm-hmm. So what we'd like to talk about, and we couldn't pick a better time than what we're going through right now, to talk to you about your platform, about your party, about what you have to offer these United States of America, and what you have to offer Pete and myself and our listeners as voters. And that's what we're fired up about. So just for our audience and your credibility for our audience, you should know that Jo has a PhD in industrial and organizational psychology from Clemson, where she is also a senior lecturer. She was part owner and president of Digitech Incorporated, and she lives in one of my very favorite cities in the United States, Greenville, South Carolina. Is that still true, Jo?
Well, I don't know if it's true that it's still one of your favorites, but that's where I live.
Okay.
Why is it one of your favorite cities?
Earlier in my career, I worked for a company called First Data, and I had a client in Greenville, South Carolina. It was called Branch Bank and Trust, BB&T, which we used a joke for Bob's Bait and Tackle. So I had occasion to visit Greenville a couple of times. I know you guys have a great little airport, a little municipal airport there, and you build BMW SUVs.
Yep.
Those are things that Greenville is known for. Lesser known about Greenville is it's a beautiful community with a thriving and vibrant downtown. which we hope will come back in full swing as soon as we get over all of this COVID business. And I had a wonderful time and several wonderful meals in that beautiful downtown and met scores of lovely, lovely people. So I really do love Greenville.
Yeah, it is a great place. Unfortunately, we were under house arrest like everybody else. In fact, if there were more than 3 people downtown, I think anywhere in the city, but especially downtown, if there were any more than 3 people congregating in one place, they could fine you $100 and put you in jail. And, we were told to stay home like everybody else. So, but now we're open and I'm so excited. And downtown is bustling again. So that's good.
I love that we get to have this conversation about, running for president. Oftentimes, and I'll speak for John a little bit here too, because we talk about this quite a bit. We are disappointed in the major candidates that are offered. I like to note that the last 3 major candidates for office are likely felons. And it would be good if we could get past that. And yet we struggle to find alternate candidates that stick, like it's they tend to be fringy, Jill Stein, the Green Party, whoever they offer. It's difficult. So what do you attribute that to? Why is it that we can accept candidates that we all think are below the bar, but we don't embrace anything else? I mean, that's clearly one of your biggest challenges, if not the biggest.
Oh, absolutely. And I think one reason is that there's basically a monopoly with the Republicans and the Democrats. I guess that we haven't been invited to the debates. We've told that we need to reach a certain number in polling, but then they keep us from reaching that number in polling by keeping us off the ballot and doing all those other things. And the other parties that you mentioned, most of them are quite different from ours in that they're a single issue kind of thing, like the Green Party, right, or even like the Socialist Party. They've got a somewhat narrow platform, but the Libertarian Party, we're basically trying to get back to our roots and we're addressing everything. And also the Green Party, I'm not sure, I don't think they have ever even been on the ballot in all 50 states, have they? Whereas
I don't think
we've done that multiple times. So there's a clear difference between you've got the Libertarian Party and then everybody else, because a lot of times they're only on the ballot, maybe 35 states.
Can you just answer for me and our listeners why you're the right candidate right now in these trying times?
First of all, I've read the Constitution. And second,
good start.
Good start, which I think, should be required reading of the president. And secondly, because I want each American to make his or her own decision as opposed to the government politicians making decisions. For instance, you can pick any field, but like the coronavirus, what we have is the government taxing people, or worse, we've got them borrowing money for, generations to come. And then they decide who gets the money. And typically it's going to the big corporations. It's going to the lobbyists and their special interests. In fact, someone on my campaign talked about they call it the CARES Act. And they said, yeah, they care all right about their special interests and lobbyists. That's who the money's going to go to. So rather than having us give our taxpayer dollars to the government and they give it to their friends, how about we keep our dollars and we give it to who we want to do business with? In fact, if you look at the stats, big corporations like Amazon, Walmart Online, their sales went way up from last year, January through March. Whereas smaller stores, the mom and pop stores, they're down like 75%. So how about let us keep the money and we'll spend it in the mom and pop stores and keep them from going out of business?
Well, hard to disagree with that.
Yes.
One of the things, so in my libertarian, bent, oftentimes I think about systems, and that's sort of what I did a lot of times in the military. Is I looked at what the government provided to a place like Afghanistan or Iraq, and I did that by being on the ground and talking to the people there. And one of the biggest data points I would gather is, hey, all this policy and theory stuff isn't happening here on the ground. Like, we can say we built schools, we can perform the performance of, hey, look how many girls are in school. But then I would go the next day and be like, there's not even a school here,
Yep.
So all of these problems of this I think even happens in our country, and it's on the website. Everybody can go to, joej2020.com to get more information. But like in your educational thing, it's perfect. Like, we've had a Department of Education for 40 years. every candidate runs pro-education and wants to raise money for education. And yet here we are 40 years later. Are we demonstrably better at education as a nation?
Worse. We're worse.
Yeah. Not at all. And if you're pro-education, you should be anti-Department of Education, because all they've done is, again, they take the local dollars, and education is a local issue. It should be decided on by teachers, parents, and students. So people send their dollars into the Department of Education. We've got an expensive middleman. And then if you do what they want you to do, then maybe you can get your money back. But sure, look at the statistics. We've had the Department of Education for 40 years, and education hasn't gotten better. If anything, it's gotten worse. So that's not working. And something a lot of people don't realize is when they first came up with it, you know how it's called the Department of Education? They were originally going to call it the Department of Public Education. And then somebody figured out what that spelled.
Uh-oh.
Wow.
And then they changed it to Department of Education. So it's like, okay, these are the people you want in charge.
Oh, that is it. Okay, that's pretty telling.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Is the government currently good at much of anything? Is there a place for anything where you think this place is where the government has a sweet spot?
Well, I'm not sure that the government is better at anything, but what I'm willing to say is we should have the government for police, courts, and military. Just what we're supposed to do. I'm fine with, let's have a military defend our country. Now, I don't mean a military everywhere else in the world, making us less safe and causing taxpayer dollars. What I want is to turn America into one giant Switzerland, armed and neutral, so we take care of our borders and not remain the world's policeman, or we just give reason for people to hate us.
One of the things I always know as a military guy,
Mm-hmm.
it's awfully hard to be the most powerful person in the world and leave your army cooped up in Kansas. Presidents don't like to do that. They really like to flex it. But on the other hand, how do you maintain a modern army that's capable of taking on someone like China, should they get dicey, or to create the kind of, I'm going to say the word stability, Joe, the kind of stability that we try to create in countries where, like NATO exists because we say so. And if not, then Russia would be a lot more, in theory, right? They'd be a lot more covetous of lands and everything. So how do you balance that? How do you balance having a powerful, capable, modern military and yet maintain whatever kind of stability we have with our partners abroad?
I would say maintain stability through free trade. And short story here, when I was in Texas, I drove a Fiat Spider, and this was, early 80s. And this nice older gentleman came up to me and he was scowling at me. And I thought, well, what's going on? I don't think I cut him off in traffic. I thought I was a nice driver. And he comes over to me, takes one look at my car, and starts complaining to me about how can you buy an Italian car, after what happened in World War II. And it turns out that he was a veteran from World War II. Now, of course, I didn't want to get into an argument or debate with him after he served our country. But the point is, if America is buying cars from Italy, they're not going to bomb us. Japan, who are our arch enemies in World War II, they're not going to bomb us now that we're buying Hondas and Toyotas. So with China, I say again, let's be their best customer. You tend not to bomb your best customer.
Okay, I'm going to push back on you, Joe. What if your ideas, which are pretty grand and look great on paper, what happens when you start to find out that they're not working like you thought they would? How do you pivot? Are you prepared to pivot?
Well, I would suggest my ideas are no more grand than Thomas Jefferson and George Washington. And, basically we'd like to go to what our country was founded on, which is freedom, to peacefully coexist, to start our own companies, to trade with who we want to trade with, to live our lives how we want to. So, and as far as it not working, all I have to do is say, look at the Democrats and Republicans. That's certainly not working. So how about we do try something different? In fact, here's one of my biggest problems with the media right now, and what other politicians are saying, which is that we keep hearing how our free market healthcare system doesn't work, so we need single payer. I mean, we haven't had free market since World War II. Actually, before then, if you count licensing. So we have anything but a free market system. More than half of the healthcare dollars go through the federal government. So what I say is the Democrat and Republican plan of trying to control our health dollars and set up all these schemes, that's not working. So how about we go back to what did work beforehand?
Yeah, fair enough. I always like to say that, in terms of healthcare and some of these big problems, no one would pick the government to be like if it really had to happen. No one would say, oh, that's the job the government can absolutely handle. I cannot literally think of a single national level service thing that they do so well that you're like, they were desperate to do it. It's just, they're
the industry leader. Yeah.
Yeah. Like you think about school administration and how much it's blown up. Like that's the government is administration. I'm convinced.
Yeah. Well, in fact, a lot of people say, well, but don't we need the government for welfare? Mm-hmm. And the question I ask is, imagine you had, an inheritance of like $100,000. And let's say you're okay, so you want to give it to somebody in need. So you look around, maybe the local church. Churches are pretty good with charity, and they tend to help the people who need it. Maybe a local nonprofit. As you look around the different places you want to give your money to, would you say, yes, I'm going to give it to a federal government program. I'm going to give it to the federal government because I know they'll do a better job of spending it. No, anybody would do a better job than they would. And that's what we've seen. If you look at the dollars, the dollars that are spent and the dollars for overhead and who gets the help that needs it, the federal government has done a horrible job with that.
I agree with those points. And Joe, I think you are the kind of person who, if you had a spare 100,000 laying around, you would allocate it properly. But what about the people who don't and who need a little nudging to do what's right? What do you say about that? Do you think that you can create a market force with libertarian principles that make people behave?
Well, let me back up your question. Okay. I would say that the system we have now is too dangerous for people who don't behave. So if you look at somebody like a Charles Manson on his own in the private, yes, he did, horrible crimes. Now let's look at Hitler and give him the tool of big government. Look at what, horrific is the only word that even starts to describe, because he had the tool of big government. So I would say that big government is too big of a tool to be left around for evil people, that we don't want them to have that kind of power. But if we're talking specifically about charity, first of all, yes, Americans have always been charitable. We didn't need charity from the government for many, many, many years because people did give on their own. And unfortunately, now we're creating kind of a I gave at the office mentality because people pay so much in taxes. But even though so much charity goes to the government, Americans are still donating money. And you look at, I keep hearing our robber barons, which first of all, that's a myth. Many of those people were huge philanthropists. But even look now, like Bill Gates, with the Bill and Melinda Foundation. Yeah. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Oprah Winfrey, who's sending who opened up the school in Africa for children. I mean, you can't just say, just because you're a billionaire, you're going to be greedy and keep it. That's not what we've seen.
I've been to the Getty. The government couldn't build that. Nope. It's just, there's no way they could do that. One of the questions I always think about in terms of getting good candidates to be president, I mean, clearly, so just in case you guys haven't already gone to the website, Joe is absolutely capable of handling the job. I mean, you've got a PhD, so you clearly are intelligent enough to handle it. But we don't seem to agree on what presidential qualities are. Like obviously 35 years old, a native-born citizen. Okay, great. But I mean, that's really not good enough, Why do we struggle to understand who is, like, first off, I truly think this job is bigger than one person can handle, and that's part of the reason why you have a giant cabinet. But why do we disagree so deeply about the type of person we need to be in the office?
Yeah, well, first of all, your comment about it's too big for one person to handle. Yeah, the government we have now,
Yeah.
which is why we need to get it smaller. But to your second part about why, why we're so divisive and why everybody's doing that, I would say it's because so much of our government because so much of our money goes through the government. If you look back in like the 1930s, 1940s, I mean, there were a lot of scandals going on in Congress, but people didn't care because the tax dollars that were taken out of people's paycheck wasn't that high. So, okay, so we've got some corrupt congressmen, so what? But now it's like you have to fight for your health care. You have to go through the government for that. You have to fight for the kind of education your kids get. You have to, so instead of having the free market in which if you want this kind of, if you want a school with religion or a school with uniforms or a school with, Pledge of Allegiance or whatever, before communities decided what kind of schools they could have, and people had enough money that they could send their kids to what we call private school now. But now we've got to answer to Washington, and Washington, again, tries to have a one size fits all. And I know, for instance, I'm in the South Carolina. They would prefer to have something like religion in their schools, which is quite different from Manhattan. And yet Washington pretty much has everybody needs to follow the same system. So what I say is let people keep their dollars and then let them choose which school they send their children to. And if you look, I mean, the average price of what we call private school, which is supposed to be really nice, is something like 1/6 of what we spend for an inferior government-run public school. So why not just let the people keep their money and then they can choose the kind of education?
What I want to say really overall is that if you look at our current big party candidates, there isn't one with a greater education at the way that systems guide people to behave than you have, and that you've also been an entrepreneur and you've led companies. So those qualifications, when Pete says what makes someone presidential, I think we can all agree that, we need leadership and we need somebody who understands the way that leadership works and the way that leadership guides people. So I'm giving you those bona fides as
Thank you for that. In fact, something that I learned, and for those who don't know, industrial organizational psychology covers leadership, motivation, teamwork, performance appraisals, selection, that kind of stuff. And what we've learned and what we know from research is that a lot of people look at experience and they say, okay, this person has experience. But we found that experience really doesn't predict performance as well as a lot of people think it does. And, because it might just be what you did, worked at that kind of corporation or that kind of company or that situation.
At that time.
Exactly, at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is it going to take, Joe, to convince a big chunk of the country that we ought to simplify?
Oh, and I like that term, simplify, because I think people see the beauty of that. Part of it is us getting our message out. Now, of course, the media has a vested interest in having the Democrats and Republicans maintain power. And we know that, journalists, studies have shown that something like 93% of journalists are Democrats. And they did that poll in which the number of Democrats who donated to Hillary Clinton's campaign was over 90%. It was just amazing. So it's hard to compete when you've got a biased media. So first of all, I come on shows as you do, try to get out the word. We've got a lot of people there on the ground who are trying to spread the message. And hopefully if we can snowball this thing, maybe we can get to the debates, because the problem is a lot of Americans don't pay attention to politics until the last minute. And so they're not following the issues. And, so many people, in fact, I don't know if you've ever seen, I don't know who does it now, but Jay Leno used to do kind of, where they'd show pictures of like the Supreme Court or even like the vice president. They would show a picture of the vice president, and it was amazing how many people didn't even recognize the picture of the vice president. So unless you really can break through that and get to these people, then they're not even going to know about us. So that's our job.
Yeah, that getting to know who you guys are and getting on the stage, it's so vital. And again, like the system is designed to do what it does. I mean, like just the media's portrayal of what's going on right now, in Minnesota and throughout the nation because of that. The God's honest truth is that there's no number backing up that cops are out actively hunting black folks. It's just not a thing. Doesn't mean that there's not a problem with justice. Doesn't mean that there's not a problem with, corrections and those kind of things. But the narrative that there's somehow, it's not there. The ability to focus your energy on where the problem is, Joe, that's one of the things that made Lincoln great. He could get to the essence of a problem where, like, if you dealt with this, and there's just in hard problems, like injustice, there's no room for party. There's no room for partisanship. How do you take people that are so polarized in terms of that and desperate for party? How do you take and get them to, how do you build consensus? It's great to have a view, but you have to build consensus. How are you going to do that in Congress?
Yeah. Well, first of all, if we take the money out of Congress, then it doesn't matter as much which rules they pass. For instance, if we shut down the Department of Education, then now it's not as powerful, and so we don't have to worry about it as much. As far as, again, if people could just keep their own money, which means they make their own decisions, because whoever has the money has the power. And right now, the people in Washington have the power. And you didn't say this, but when you mentioned, like, in these times, and you mentioned the police brutality. Again, here's the thing: crime is a local problem. Breaking into somebody's house, that's a local problem. And what we've had the federal government give local law enforcement, kind of military tanks and training and money, and they have these joint task forces. And so now that only emboldens the local police and puts them in kind of a military mindset. And if you think about it, do you think most cities would say, yeah, let's have our taxpayer dollars go to buy, some tank? No. But when their money gets taken from them into this, big abyss, and they don't have control over it, and then the federal government sends back a big tank, you'll be like, oh, you're giving us a free tank? Okay, we'll take it. And so it just adds a level of, you're talking about divisiveness. It just adds another level there for things to get out of hand.
The town I grew up in is Vallejo, California. And last night in Vallejo, California, there were stores that were looted. Mm-hmm. There was civil unrest.
Yeah.
I am currently in Alamo, California, which is a beautiful enclave right next to Walnut Creek. And Walnut Creek there's a Nordstrom in Walnut Creek. It's beautiful. Mm-hmm. There was looting in Walnut Creek last night. So what do you have for the problem that we have? And, it's a local problem in a lot of localities because there was unrest in a lot of places last night. As the leader of the not just free world, but the world where there's a lot of looting in a lot of cities, what do you do about it?
Yeah, well, first of all, as I mentioned, what can the president do? One of the things the president can do is, as I mentioned, we can stop sending this money and training and tanks to the local cities that kind of embolden them, because now they've got this reaction where they may not have had that already. And also, if we just look at how, a lot of, we're all trying to figure out what caused this to begin with, right? And we don't know what was in the policeman's mind. A lot of people are attributing this to race. And it's no wonder that people are upset over this, because we've had institutionalized racism in the government for so long. And you trace it back, when the slaves were first freed, unfortunately, fortunately, first of all, the free market was working for the slaves. They offered their excellent services at lower prices, which is what you do when you start a company. That's what I did when I started a company. So, but the problem is they were getting too many customers. They could compete against the whites really well, and they were taking away their business. So the whites, instead of competing by lowering their prices, they said, oh, we know, we'll just put laws in there. And there have been laws pretty much in the government the entire time. And, we had, like with real estate, we had redlining, we had Rosa Parks, which was on a government-owned bus. And so part of the problem was that, and even like the government housing that the government set up. In old days, we had the poor among the rest of the community. In fact, you just mentioned the place that you're in with the Nordstrom. Then what happened is the government came along and said, okay, we're going to house all the poor over here and keep them separate. When they were interspersed among the community, they could get help from the neighbors. A neighbor could say, oh, hey, I'm a manager. There's a place down here you can work, maybe give them tips. But now they're all put away where, by the government, they're segregated by the government, in which they have to rely on each other, but nobody's capable of helping each other the way the government has set it up. So, basically we've got a lot of government instituted programs that have gotten us here.
Yeah, it's funny because I so agree with you in so many ways. I mean, there are things that make sense to me in terms of the public state of mind. Things like the FDA and FTC and some of these organizations that without them, we would be left to our own devices and we would be able to handle it, I believe, but there would be a lot more, I'm going to say chaos and lack of belief. I mean, the FDA holds people accountable. U.S. Ag does a lot of things with all this emerging, meat production that's done in labs. Someone has to kind of look out for me. I don't have time to look out for all these things. So are there look, U.S. Commerce, you could talk me into shutting them down all day long. I have no idea what they did. I don't know that anybody holds them accountable for being successful. Joe's going to be right back. So John, let me ask you, is there a government organization that you're like, this government organization runs smooth and I would be glad to keep it? And then are there any that you would like, I just don't understand how they perform enough to warrant the billions of dollars that they get?
My dad had a career with the Department of the Navy.
Yeah.
And I was always pretty impressed by
Here comes
the
Joe.
things that he was able to accomplish.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I've never had this happen in StreamYard. Yeah. So let me address two of the things that I heard you say something about meat inspection. So we need, government to inspect the meat. Okay, why not have private organizations? First of all, if you look at the underwriter laboratories, if you see the UL on your little outlet, that's not government run. We've got Consumer Reports. We've got the internet. For restaurants, we had, the mobile star guide where the restaurant would get 5 stars, 4 stars, whatever. Here's the thing. Let's say a private company is inspecting meat or a restaurant or whatever. If they do a bad job, if their inspector gets bought off, then they go out of business, as they should, or people don't trust them. What happens if a government inspector gets paid off? Well, he gets promoted to a desk job or somewhere else, and then they just collect more tax dollars and they keep running it. So basically, nobody is held accountable in the government, whereas in private companies, whether it's charity, whether it's, grading restaurants or inspecting meat, if they don't do a good job, then they go out of business. And so they better do a good job or they're going to go out of business. And let me go back to the FDA. Until 1962, you only had to prove safety with a drug, not efficacy. After 1962, you had to prove efficacy. So you had to show it worked. Now, showing that a drug works, that sounds pretty noble. But the problem is it takes like $1 billion now to prove that a drug works, because you've got to have, the gold standard of science. You've got to have the randomized control trials and double-blind studies and all that. So it costs so much now to put a drug on the market that now there are, the orphan drug thing, the orphan diseases where there's not enough money. Well, there's not enough money because the government has put so many roadblocks that you can't make a profit unless a lot of people have that disease. And take it back to the virus. There were something like over 60 American companies coming up with testing kits, and the FDA approved 2 of them. So And you might think, well, these other test kits, like maybe, they got dumped in the garbage heap, or maybe they went out of business. But no, they were allowed to sell those testing kits all over the world. So, and other people were ahead of us in testing, then, ahead of us. So we're the ones creating the tests, and yet we don't get the benefit of American ingenuity, but other countries do. And if you look, before 1962, having that efficacy thing was really, it didn't help enough that it was worth it, because if drugs didn't work, they were pulled off the market pretty quick because doctors and patients realized, hey, this drug doesn't work. By the way, that's one thing that I think President Trump should have done immediately with the virus, is using his Emergency Powers Act, is get rid of that efficacy requirement so we can get through the testing, get that through the FDA. So right now we just have the FDA as a roadblock.
Yeah. One of the things that bugs me about the current candidates too, especially on the Democrat side, is there are a whole lot of legislators that are there that are telling us what they're going to do when they are president. But why aren't they doing it now while they're legislators? What is going on? Why do we get so spun up with these folks that Elizabeth Warren said that when she was president, she was going to cut in half veteran suicide rate. That's just one example. What are you waiting for? What are you waiting for, Elizabeth Warren? Do it now.
Hey, this is Pete A. Turner from Lions Rock Productions. We create podcasts around here, and if you, your brand, or your company want to figure out how to do a podcast, just talk to me. I'll give you the advice on the right gear, the best plan, and show you how to take a podcast that makes sense for you, that's sustainable, that's scalable, and fun. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me help. I want to hear about it.
Elizabeth Warren said that when she was president, she was going to cut in half veteran suicide rate. That's just one example. What are you waiting for? What are you waiting for, Elizabeth Warren? Do it now. So what do you have to say in terms of compelling Congress to, do less when they want to do more, or just in general, how do you get them? We're so bad at consensus right now, Joe. That's what I'm trying to figure out, is how do you build that consensus with folks that don't get things done?
Yeah, and as far as Elizabeth Warren cutting suicides in half, we can see how much better private companies work, private charities. So why doesn't she set up some fund, some charity, some research group to do that? You don't have to have the government do it. And that's the kind of mindset that we got into it. But if I were elected president, that would be like a mandate. The Congress would get the idea, okay, this is what my constituents want, so I guess I better go along with her. Because one thing we know is that Congress people love their jobs, and they will listen to their constituents because they don't want to get rid of their, way overpaid salary.
I want to go back to our very, very timely problem, because I really like you, Joe, and I wish you were president right now.
Oh, thank you.
If you were president right now, what would you be telling our country?
I would say it doesn't have to be this way. I would say we can have a different kind of country where instead of dealing with each other through force, we can deal with each other voluntarily. You get to keep your money. You get to decide how to raise your kids. You get to choose the education. You get to choose who you marry. You get to choose if you keep a gun in your home. And I don't care what kind of gun you own, just so you don't commit a crime with it. Simple possession of anything shouldn't be a crime. So let's go back to before we started having all these laws passed, in which we had now we have we've got so many laws, it's hard to even not break a law. But what I would ask American people, what I would tell them is, say, okay, if you didn't have to pay an income tax, which is what I would get rid of the first year. If you didn't have to pay an income tax, what would you do with that $12,000 a year? Children's education, go on a vacation, whatever. For Social Security, instead of continuing a broken system where older people have to worry, okay, what are the whims of the Congress this week? Are they going to give me enough of a cost of living that I can support myself? Instead, what I would do is have an immediate opt-out so that the young people don't have to invest in a broken system, which they know is broken. And the older people, I would sell off government assets, such as downtown office buildings, mineral rights, and so forth, and give them back the money that they paid in, money that they were forced to pay in, and say, okay, now you can be safe and secure. Now you're not under the whims of Congress. Now you can do what you want with your money, and you know you have it there, and you don't have to worry, is it going to be there next week or next month or next year?
I think you even said on your website, I don't trust those guys to take care of my retirement. And they've already proven that they're like, hey, there's a pile of money. Let's do something with that. And that's just, it's not a tenable way to run a safety net. You know, it's not supposed to be your investment account.
There are people who are old enough, though, that they need it, and they need you not to take it away right now. What about the people who are 54 years old and are depending on the safety net that you're going to dismantle? How do you dismantle that? Sorry to interrupt you, Pete.
Well, first of all, I think the number one problem to go after is corporate welfare, not individual welfare. So first month in office, I wouldn't take anything away from anybody. But somebody who's 54 years old, you're right. They've already paid into the system over 30 years. Let's give them back a lump sum of what they've paid in and say, now you invest it how you want. So I am not going to, on day one, just say no more Social Security. We would keep making payments until we got people, back what they deserved. It's the 20 and 30-year-olds that you say, okay, you can get back what you deserve, what you've paid in, or you can right now just opt out and you can go find a private fund, which even if you're 28 years old, heck, if you're 35 years old, if you started from scratch, you would be better off than continuing in the Social Security system, the system we have now. Oh, I just wanted to mention, you're absolutely right. We can't pull the rug out from under people. We have to, it's basically like it's like, Harry Brown used to say that if the government breaks your leg and then thinks you should appreciate it for handing you the crutch. And we've done something even worse. It's like we've put them in crutches because if we hadn't taken away their money, they would be self-sufficient. So we've put them in crutches. And now what we're saying is, okay, we're taking away your crutches. No, we can't do that.
How do you compel people to do something that's good for them? We can't get people to not smoke and not eat too much. How do you do it?
Why? I mean, you're talking to I've never taken even so much as a puff of a tobacco cigarette in my life. Yeah. My drug of choice is bourbon, but okay, so I drink too much bourbon. Oh, well, I mean, I'm not sure how. But
in terms of like your financial well-being for long term, how do you compel people to actually, because what we don't want are people that are like, I never thought I was going to get old, I was going to die, and so how do you get people to actually look to the future to take care of their financial well-being? That's my question.
Yeah. First of all, most people understand that they have to save money for a rainy day. They've just been conditioned by the government to, we'll take care of you. But people were fine with retirement before the Social Security system came along. What they had was a couple of very isolated cases, and they said, wouldn't this be great to help these people? And then it blew way out of proportion. And, if you look at the poverty rate in America was going down until we started the war on poverty. It was going down drastically and then continued to go down, but it started going down a heck of a lot slower. But like aid to family with dependent children, that was supposed to be for widows and orphans. And they said, wouldn't it be great to just help the people, help these people? Now, mind you, some of these people were already being helped by neighbors, friends, family, and so forth. But the government says, we want to help you. And then what do we have? Years later, 50 years later, whenever it was, I read an article in the Wall Street Journal in which they were interviewing a 15-year-old high school girl who was not using a contraceptive. And they asked, well, what's going to happen if you get pregnant? And she said, I'll just go on AFDC. That's fine. In fact, that'll be good because then I don't have to listen to what my parents say. So then it becomes like planned poverty. And, if you have a child at that young of an age, it's hard to get out of poverty. And if you look at, basically how the government works is they tend to put people in a worse position than they were before they got there.
I think that's the core belief in the libertarian philosophy, is that we do better for ourselves than the government does for us. But Scott from Benicia brings up a good point. Many people don't have the capability of managing their own finances and are simply used to budgeting for their monthly check. How do we educate these folks to handle the lump sum they had to manage and secure? Because, like you said, you want to give people the money back that they've invested. How do we make sure they do the right thing with it? What's the incentive there?
Well, let me start off by saying utopia is not an option. I'm not going, yes, somebody's going to fall through the cracks. But when it comes to charity, that should be a local issue. If you think about it, people in rural Appalachia, they have much different needs than somebody who's poor in downtown Manhattan. So let that be done at the local level. And by the way, and as president, I'm not going to say that a state government or a local government shouldn't help people out. But what I'm saying is this is more of a local issue. And I'm saying that you will have charities that will help people. In fact, we've got a place in Greenville which does help people budget their money, people without a lot of money. So we already do have private charity who's doing that. And if people get to keep their money, then and we get to put it in their system, then that does such a much better job. In fact, if you don't mind, I'd like to give you my other story about, well, one of many, but something else that's pertinent here is, I'm not sure if you remember, but in the early 90s, United Way, the president of United Way bought something like $400,000 worth of artwork, and donations went down. And keep in mind, that's worth almost $1 million today with government caused inflation. So basically donations went down because the people said, look, we don't want our money going to expensive artwork. We want money going to the people who need it. And so donations went down. And they had to do a better job to have people trust them enough to start giving donations back. Now, what happens if the government spends too much in overhead? Nothing. There's nothing you can do. There's no accountability. So I'm not saying we should leave everybody in the streets. What I'm saying is, if you go through local charity and you go through private organizations who are held accountable, they will do a better job than the government will.
When I look at the number of trillions of dollars that we have borrowed, it's 23. And at some point, as someone who's willing to borrow money, what's $1 trillion anymore? What do you do to deal with that massive problem? Because that ultimately, the way that gets solved is war. I mean, that's just how this goes.
Yeah, like they say, $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there. After a while, it adds up, right?
Yeah.
So. And so, if people say, well, what about people not being able to support themselves or save for their retirement? Yeah, what about them spending trillions of dollars of our money on things we don't want it spent on? Is that a better system? And I would say no. And so, immediately, what I would do in office is, first of all, seriously cut down the size of our military. Enough, our military is 3 times the size of the next largest military on this earth. So we could cut our military. There's no reason why we should be subsidizing wealthy Europe. Let's let them have their own military. Bring our troops home. That alone could save like $750 billion. And then with Social Security, again, if we sell assets that are already bought and paid for by former taxpayers' money, or, retiring taxpayers' money, sell those things and give them the money back, and then we don't have that. So we're able to cut a couple $1 trillion out of the budget.
Pete, can we reduce the military in the scale that Joe is talking about?
Not without replacing some of the responsibility with, like she said, like let the European countries fend for themselves. And if Russia has more power and they want to push, then we can renegotiate deals. I mean, if we're going to maintain the size of military that we have, we cannot be spread as thin as we are, and we cannot ask as much of those people. We're just not set up for it. So yeah, we like to go places and get ourselves involved in things, and that costs trillions of dollars too.
Exactly. And if you look at 9/11, bin Laden, and of course, nothing justifies 9/11, okay? Nothing, absolutely nothing justifies what happened. However, bin Laden was able to convince people over in the Middle East that what we were doing justified it. And what we were doing at the time is we said, we'll be over here temporarily. We weren't. We would give them a date. We're going to be gone by this date. We weren't gone. And so what he would do is he would go to the people and say, look, the American government is lying. They said they'd be gone. They're still here. And then he would, get them all excited. And again, nothing justifies it, but he found a way to justify it. If we were here and not there, he would have a lot harder time justifying it.
We're going to run out of time. I have one question. I'll let John ask the rest. But talk to us about your environmental policy. One of the people we've had on the show is Dr. Stephen Running from University of Montana, and he's a Nobel Peace Prize winner. And I asked him, I said, people say global climate change, but they don't talk about a goal. And he said, let's get carbon down to 400. And that was the first time I heard anybody say anything that wasn't just, fear. He's like, let's do that. Yeah, that's higher than it's historically ever been, but with what we're doing now, we can process a lot of it. So if that's the goal, how do we do that? Or what is your goal?
Well, can I ask you real quickly? And I don't have a number like that, but how does he think we can do it in like 20 seconds or less?
Yeah, you're going to like this. He said, stop burning coal. Stop burning coal would be the number one thing we could do. Don't burn it here in our nation anymore. And we're doing that in effect, like that industry is dying out.
Yep. I do think we need to go to nuclear power. A lot of people get worried when they hear nuclear power, but what they're looking at is they're looking at the old technology nuclear power. When the government went in and chose winners, basically they looked at all the options out there, said, okay, we picked that one, and it ended up not being a very good one. And now we've got, and the analogy I like to give is, imagine we've got Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and IBM, all these people selling computers, and the government says, okay, we want this one, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, no need for you to make computers. Now you've got somebody who doesn't have any motivation to give the best quality at the lowest price. So we didn't have a good product. Right now, though, with the advanced nuclear technology, we do have companies competing. One of them is Rolls-Royce. The nuclear reactors are like 1/10 the size. And if the government doesn't step in and mess things up, if they just allow the companies to continue to work for our business, yeah, we can go to nuclear power. And that's if you're an environmentalist, you really need to be for nuclear power.
Joe, your ideas are again going back to simplicity, and we're warm to a lot of them. How do you get them through the current Congress?
Well, again, if I were elected, then they would get the idea, okay, this is what the people want. And also, there would be a movement. It would be hard for a president to be elected without some Congress people also elected. However, what I wouldn't do, I thought this was rather humorous. I was listening to my local talk radio show, and I don't know if you remember, but John McCain used to say he would go across the aisle, and talk to the Democrats. And somebody locally called in and said, well, the next time John McCain walks across the aisle, he can just sit down there because that's how he's voting anyway. So what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to give in and sign unbalanced budgets. I'm not going to let government get bigger. I'm going to say, if you bring me a budget that's not balanced, go back, work on it again, and bring it back. And again, if that's what the people wanted, then that's a clear message that they need to do that.
Joe, if you become president and you want to hire me for a job, I promise to make you fire me and kick me out as I close the door in that place. Get out of here, Turner.
Awesome. Awesome.
I'll make you the smallest Department of Education ever, I'll take the heat.
On the way to it being gone? Okay.
Yeah.
What's the idea you want to get across to our listeners and voters all across the country? What is the key issue that you think is the linchpin that gets the Libertarian Party traction unlike you've had before?
Yeah, the key issue is, my one question is, do you think government is too big or do you think it's too small? If you think government is too small, go ahead and vote for both Democrats and Republicans. If, however, you think if you think the government is too big and you want to make it small, the only choice is the Libertarian Party. And that, a lot of people say that's a wasted vote. I say it's a wasted vote to vote for something you don't want. So if you don't want bigger government, then stop voting for it. And we see that with Trump. You know, he came in as an outsider. I'm really going to shake things up. And government's only getting bigger. The deficit's going up when he said he'd get rid of it. So you can see that for the many fine Republican voters who truly want smaller government, if Donald Trump couldn't get it smaller, there's no Republican who can get it smaller.
That's a great point. What's the best place people come and support you and learn more about you besides the website? Is there anywhere else you'd want to send people?
Oh, yeah, just joj2020.com. We have resources there. And, please help our campaign. We'd love donations because we've got to get the word out. We're going to try to get the word out as soon as we can to start snowballing, and we're on our way.
Jo Jorgensen is the Libertarian nominee for this coming election for President of these United States of America, and we are proud to have had you on. Thank you so much, Jo. I think you've given us a lot to think about. You've given us a lot to be inspired by. I wish you the best. I wish you a whole lot of luck, and I hope that you do very, very well, and that you take this message of simplicity to big, big places.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to share my message. And yeah, I might add some simplicity to my campaign slogan. That's a good one.
I'm voting for you, Jo. It's official. Like, for real, 100%. I'm not voting for those other two guys. You're my lady. And by the way, I don't even care that you're a lady at all. It's just, I think you're great at what you do.
Exactly.
You're the best thing going so far. I will also say that.
Oh, you're going to vote for me too?
I'm going to vote for you.
So now we just need to get everybody else in the there.
That's true.
59 million more to go.
There you go.